we're talking about our third chapter on culture. I have to admit, this section is a monster within itself, and a lot of context that needs to be covered. What I've done today, so that we can just finish the section of culture in 3 sessions and not go into a fourth session, is there's some theory of interest that we will show. I won't go through each model in detail. One, death by models, and the other one being the time restraint. So I'll take longer than the 15 minutes. I'll be closer to 20, 25 minutes to get through the session that I want to get through. And then in any of the question times, we can look at any of the models in more detail, or you have the theory, you've got the copies of the things, so you can look at them more in your own environment. Horde culture. What we learned before is that everyone's responsible for it. Everything we all do contributes towards the culture, and particularly from the chairman right down to the workers. We see all those behaviors, how they develop and create a culture in an environment, but equally, so culture drives behavior, but behavior also causes culture. And we understood, if we look backwards in environments, that there is the situation where you can actually see what has happened. If you look at the culture, you can actually see the passage and the journey to failure. And what we're looking to try and do, looking forwards as intelligent boards, is to stop those things happening before they happen. So how do we learn to become more mindful of the cultures in our organization and the warnings that they're sending to us? Now, in my circumstance, where I work with boards all the time, you can see things more clearly than the board itself can see it, which is actually quite interesting. Very quickly, a canter through what we went through in the last 2 sessions. There's visible evidence of culture, who influences culture, recognizing the presence of culture, went through a couple of examples, cultures in different kinds of business, industries, size of business, nature of business. And then we've also learned that we can't see it, we can sense it, and the outcomes are what we see. Last week, we went through vision, ethics, behavior, communications, and those influences upon culture. We also went through the UK Corporate Governance Code, King 4, Nolan principles, and understood that accountability was the only common word, and the one that surprised us most that wasn't there was the word trust in all of those principle documents, codes. We also went through what goes wrong. We looked at the research findings as well as my experiences, and we also identified what it feels like in an environment when culture has gone wrong. So what we're going to cover today are some models that have, this is sort of the theory part of it, ethics and the influence that has on culture, what a performance culture is, and the role that different people have on influencing culture. So it's quite a lot that we need to get through, but we can do it. What is the chairman's role and responsibility towards culture? So the first place I turned to have a look at that was Principle F of the UK Corporate Governance Code. So it's our 6th principle. It says that the chair leads the board and is responsible for its overall effectiveness in directing the company. They should demonstrate objective judgment throughout their tenure and promote a culture of openness and debate. That is probably one of the few places where culture is referred directly to in the code, but there we have got the link between the chairman and the chairman's responsibility towards governance, but particularly towards culture. We do also have in one of the earlier principles is that culture needs to be aligned to the strategy and the vision of the company as well, and the purpose and strategy is the ones they've called it. In addition, you're looking for constructive boardroom relationships and an effective contribution from all non-executive directors to create that board culture that we're talking about. So these are things that have been picked up in the code. They also at that point refer to correct and timely information, but that is not what we're covering right now. Now, there have been a whole bunch of models that have been provided to try and help people try and get their mind around what culture is, trying to create it into a structure so that they can measure it, look as to whether they're in the good or the bad, the above or below. And there's a number of models out there. So I'm going to just canter through the different models. I'm not going to try at this point in the exercise to assess it, but this could be some part of the framework and groundwork a board might go through to try and determine whether they have got a good culture or not, is to try and rate themselves against a number of these models. So as we know with anything in life, we all go through a process of adjusting to a certain changed set of circumstances. So if we're starting to talk more about culture and we're starting to talk more about how we want to change a culture within the organization, we are likely to hit the change resistance that we get from people generally, which is the transition curve, which there's a little diagram of it there, where we get angry, we deny it, we pretend it's not there, then we accept it, and then we embrace it. So it's this journey that we all go on, going through change. Now, in cultural development, they have identified those 6 phases with slightly different words. So is the denial, it is defense, and it is minimalization. So it's trying to think it's not important. So it's people being biased, judging it from their preconceptions, and almost saying, well, I don't need to worry, I'm not going to get involved. Then they go through the acceptance, they adapt to some of the cultural changes that are required or being led, and then there is the integration of it into their DNA of the organization and who they are. So going through the various models, and I'm going to canter through these, and please forgive me, but we can all go back to them and we will all have the theory. There's the bedrock of Horde culture. So it's combining sort of the trusted friend, trustee style role relationship and mapping that against a more board formal role and trying to map where the company is fitting between being an orchestra consultant, regulated agency, or a lone ranger. This one is probably the one that I find the most difficult to really understand what it's trying to do. So I'll be absolutely honest on that one. Then we have the power culture model, which is balancing the power of the CEO versus the power of the board relative to the organization, and how it's more statutory or caretaker in mode, participative or proactive, aiming for the top right quadrant for your board to be a participative board. And it covers there, that's collegiate, shared leadership, normative, and strategic. So that's where most companies would like to go to. We then have the engaged culture model, where once again we are looking at board CEO power balancing and getting it to being a effective operating place. And that's where we're looking for in this particular case, is to actually get to the middle point where the organization is operating effectively and everybody is engaged. But you once again are looking to get to top right, engaged into operating. Another one we've got is the learning culture board, which is making sure that once you learn something, you build upon that learning experience and take accountability in all respects for what is happening within the organization. So it's looking at short-term, long-term, internal and external impacts, and how the board is in a constantly evolving, continuous personal board development place. So it's not just humans that go through that. Another one is the performance culture. So it's aiming here again to be the professional board, but we could be anything from country club board, which this is a friendly place to be. Rubber stamp board we see unfortunately a little too often out there. The representative board, which is probably where a fair number of them are, and the professional board is where we're aiming to be. Competing values framework, which is, if you take a look at one very good example, going from an adhocracy to a market organization, in other words, a private company that becomes listed. An example of that would be the culture change EasyJet went through as it transitioned from being a private company to listed. You could take another example where you take Virgin, that went from private to listed and back to private, and how that has impacted their culture in those journeys. Charity, public sector, hierarchical type environments. So this one is actually quite a useful one to use for an organization, much easier to try and make the assessments. That's my massive counter over in a hurry. Now we'll just go through the last couple of slides that I want to go through, last few slides. If we talk about an ethical culture, it's referred to in the King 4 corporate governance code, not referred to in our code. But what we do have in the code is picking up where risk might be arising and the understanding and shared value of the spirit of the law, what is right for the organization, and making sure that trust is there, because if trust is not there, we don't have what we call the bedrock of a good workplace. So that is quite a critical aspect of culture. The impact on the team is quite important, because if there's trust, you've got a far greater opportunity for genuine openness, genuine straight talking, safe place for people to operate, to speak up, to raise difficult questions, but equally for the individuals as well as the entity to be agile and to be effective in every way. If you look at Stephen Covey, who most of you will know for his famous books, he talks about ethical culture, and he bases it on a number of character traits. So he talks about the talking straight, transparency, right the wrongs, the loyalty that we talk about. So there's character-based behaviors that, or components as he calls them. There are also what he calls competence-based traits, as people who want to, the actual doing part of the characteristics, capabilities, and behaviors of board directors. The first being what is exactly what the DNA of the individual is. The third one is a few combined traits that he talks about, which is listening, keeping to commitments, and extending trust. So that's a combination of both character and competence in his view. And then we have the learning environment, where the team learns to trust as a unit above the individual trust they have with people. So it becomes a combined trust. They say that organization where there's high team trust, there's equally a high performing board. So this is where you are looking towards reaching that objective of having that communal trust, which is the sum, the whole is greater than the sum of the individual parts with a bit of luck. So if we look at what does a high trust team deliver, better management of risk, and it can create an ethical culture which can be followed within by the organization, by the operations, by management as well. So if we then go on to the risks to culture that can be experienced. Now, there are a lot of risks to a good culture. There's just a number of those that I see most often. So these have come from experience of working with boards. So one of the key ones is difficulty seeking help or seeking an understanding of what they look like, as well as accepting the feedback. Now, when you're working with a board and a chairman that is very open to respecting change, respecting feedback, respecting critique that is value adding, you won't have that kind of problem. So this is when you've got the leadership not being bought into the board evaluation exercise and understanding that they have a cultural issue. One of the things we see chairmen do is putting in their own points of view too much, leading the conversation, making it difficult for others to have a different opinion, not giving people a safe place, people having emotional outbursts, having their own clique that they work with the clique and not with the collective of the entire board. Unfortunately, some people do at a chairman level have their own personal agendas. And the two at the bottom are the ones that I think are sort of the ones that we need to be more mindful of today in today's board leadership, is needing to be a modern chairman. So that sounds very trite, but what we're saying is, are we accepting the new expectations of investors? Are we expecting the new expectations of stakeholders? Do we know what the new customer is looking for and has an expectance on? And things like ESG are one of them, ethical behavior, ethical investing, ethical supply chains, taking into account your planet, the green agenda, those things are also being required. And not recognizing those needs that stakeholders are putting onto business today is a big mistake for most boards. And it's helping chairmen who have never had to do it before in their entire business career of 70 odd decades long. Okay, I hope they have a child for part of that. But for that whole period of time that they have been in business, this has not been what they've had to focus on. They've had to focus on delivering to stakeholders. And that is in most cases bottom line driven, and to investors being the key stakeholder. So it's a very different mindset that boards are having to move towards, and not naturally an easy one for them to adapt. But that's where we need to all help in this process of culture change. Corporate culture, as such, is defined as the human glue. It's how things collectively work together, the energies that are formed, and the embeds the way things are done within a given organization and makes it quite a specific place. So it's that business environment, that organization's values, the heroes within the organization. In other words, who do people look up to? Who acts as a mentor? Who do people copy in what they're doing? And an organization I've worked with recently, they had a board director that wasn't necessarily behaving according to the corporate culture, and how they evidenced over a short period of time how some of the other directors started to pick up that kind of behavior, which wasn't what they were wanting to embed as their culture. So it's something they've had to address and work with the individual people as to what is appropriate behavior and how can you do the right thing by yourself, but equally to be mindful of the impact that has on others and how it collectively works for board culture. Rites and rituals they have, do you turn your camera on? Do you turn your camera off? Do you put your hand up? Do you say, Mr. Chairman? Yeah. What are the rites and rituals of the way we interact in that organization? And obviously the cultural network that exists. So cultural intelligence, sometimes known as CQ, we talk about the different Qs in life. Kakabasi's come up with 5. We added to that. In the Genius model, we have 10 quotients that we need to consider as board directors. And we'll pick that up as a future topic in due course. You've got to tease out the behavior, the features that would be true if all people and groups within the organization were to be asked what is their culture, what is specific to any smaller groups, but it's interpret that without actually knowing the language. In other words, what can you see in the cultures? What are the skills that you can see in people that deliver and support the culture? How aware are people of the culture in the organization? So what would people say if you asked the same person, many people the same question? And I'm getting there, almost there. In the theory, you learn about 4 organizational types: the tough guy, the work hard, play hard kind of culture, bet the company culture, and a culture of being process orientated. And in my view, that probably doesn't cover a full, accurate mix of all the organizational cultures that might exist out there. So just a few that I've added to that is a family culture, that of an entrepreneurial startup digital type of environment, that of a mature cash cow type organization, and one, for example, which is either blue collar or white collar or a combination, companies that are ruled by union activity. Those will give very, very different organizational behaviors and cultures that would manifest in those organizations. The other thing that impacts culture is words. What do we mean by words? What do we expect people to do in response to words? How do people keep time? Is it important to be at a meeting on time? Is it important to end a meeting on time? How do you praise people, give strokes, interact with people when they've done well? How do we action and deliver and hold to account on various activities that we're getting happening through the meeting? If somebody says, if they're not the head, are they saying yes? Are they saying no? Different cultures, it means something very different. So body language can mean different things in different cultures. And saying yes doesn't always mean yes. In different cultures, it means, okay, well, I'll do what I want, but I'll just fob you off for the meantime. In other places, it means exactly, yes, it does. What do we do with our hands? How does that impact on cultures that do different things with their hands in a corporate environment? If you look at eyes, eye contact, that means different things. Some cultures, that is quite disrespectful to look at somebody in the eye. Other cultures, it's disrespectful not to look at somebody in the eye. So there's a very different play out in our body language as well as the words we use that will all complement the outcome of the corporate culture. That is all I'm going to cover on the subject of culture today to close off the subject. So guys, that was just on 23 odd minutes, so about time on what I expected. Next time we're going to be talking about bias and influence on effective board outcomes, but that's not where we are today. What I wondered, was there any other conversations we'd like to have in the next 20 minutes around the boardroom culture environment of what we are dealing with? From Keith's recommended book, The Culture Map Decoding How People Think, Lead, and Things Done Across Cultures. So picking up on a couple of the points that we've just talked about, everything from words to body language to how we use them, how we engage with people. Sounds very interesting. I've not read the book, but thanks very much, Keith. We'll pick that up in one of our topics or blogs that we want to work on. So that is very helpful. If you were looking at culture, what are the things you would like to ask to try and determine what your culture is in your organization? We've talked about a couple of broader topics here, but if you had to, at this point in time, or maybe look at it from another point of view, what are typical cultures you've experienced that you would like to put one or two words to as to how you would describe that culture? If you want to drop it down in the chat line, what some of those culture descriptions might be. Let's see if we can get a couple of them together. I mean, cultures I've seen, for example, are embedded in the 1950s, for example. When you're trying to work with a chairman who has brought on to their board diversity, because that's what they needed to do, because he was forced into do it and wouldn't have happily done it in the first place. And all it did was make this poor gentleman's life an absolute misery, because he's in the 1950s expecting around the table to be of like people. And now he's had to employ females and he's had to employ some younger people on the board. So he's brought on three women. They brought on three women. And they had three of the older style non-execs still there. And the culture I could probably describe, other than being embedded in the 1950s, was divided. The marrying of these two behavior traits within that board was something they hadn't even seen, yet they were using language about the new ones, the other half, and they were always talking about the other group in totally condescending ways. And it was quite interesting that none of them, not even the new people, could identify it as being a situation that they were really struggling with as an organization. When you identified it, the newer, younger people, which happened, unfortunately, to have all the diversities to therefore be different to the other group, physically, you could see they were different, actually said, that explains some of the things that I've been feeling and not being able to understand. So what the next stage was to work with the company secretary and with the chairman to try and build a marrying of the two cultures so that they had one organizational board culture rather than the two completely divergent cultures at board level. So that's an example. So Christina's made the reference around the onboarding and induction and bringing up to speed new directors as they're coming into the organization, such that you don't get the clash I've just referred to as an example. So here we're sitting with two things that I'd like to address. One is onboarding so they understand what the culture is and are not guessing it and getting it wrong and wrong-footing it. The other one is very quickly, after they've been part of the organization, is to actually have the conversations, what does the culture feel like? What do you understand that culture to be? And is it something, when you hear back what they're saying, that you are proud of as an organization? So as a chairman, the fresh eyes of a new person coming in is the most invaluable information you can get, because it's the closest you'll get to a formalized experienced board evaluation to actually listen to that. But the importance from one of the key influencers on a board and on the culture of a board and on the chairman is your company secretary. So if you look at the influence the company secretary can have in effective onboarding, effective identifying of culture, and competent influencing of where that culture is going, you can get to a much better place. Another question we've got is, how would you argue for a change in culture for a company that was performing well financially, but whose culture was objectively terrible? That's actually quite an interesting one. So is the company making money despite it? Is it making money because that is the focus and the bottom line for which it's been driving? Is it just a cash cow that's just churning over money and everyone else is taking a very laid back view? So I think the point to that one is where you are now might be survival, but it's not going to be retained. The culture will ultimately get the better of it because it's in that place because of the life cycle the organization's in, which is a function of the people that are driving it. So change will occur. It's just, which way do you want that change to go? How nuclear might that change be? And what will the impact be on the bottom line when that change occurs? So the best is to actually get the culture to preempt and protect the organization from the nuclear outcome of other forms of change. Another question we had, if the culture is not matching that you espouse the culture to be, so I was going back also to our code, how can you as an organization or as an external or somebody as an influencer within the organization actually interact with the body, with the company, to actually bring that alignment back? Now, one is obvious, we've talked about a couple of times, to bring in an external, so a culture expert, a board evaluator, so somebody who can identify that. You can go through psychometric testing, you can go through EQ testing, you can do all sorts of other assessments to try and pigeonhole and point a finger into what those things are. I think the importance, though, is for whatever feedback is received as a result of these exercises and a board evaluation done by people that focus on the culture aspect is a very valuable one, because you're getting an interactive response, not only a objective clinical response, is to open your ears to the message and the information you're being shared and fed at that point in time. Because if you're not going to listen, please don't bother wasting your emotion over it, because you're going to get emotional over it. So I think the most important is to be aligned, to recognize you're going to have to move and change, and to be open to that in every respect. Recommended books, we've already had one. What we will do is we'll drop a couple of lines on books to pick up that you can read and places. So we'll do that. We'll be putting a blog out on the whole culture chapter that we've been through over the last 3 weeks. And we'll put some suggested titles in there as well of good books. So anybody's got some, please email to me or drop it on LinkedIn as well. We've got one already that has come in. Another question that's come forward, thanks very much, is right, new guard, old guard. We've seen some transition. Some of the people who've been on the board for a period of time have moved on, so it goes with that legacy knowledge is at risk of departing the organization, but equally an older style of doing things is also would have been moved in part. The risk you've got is the one I talked about earlier, is where you've ended up with a new guard coming in. The question that in this one is, how do you manage it? The question will come is, which one is the chairman and which one is the CEO? Is the chairman one of the old or new guards? And is the CEO one of the old or new guards? And that will give you an idea as a company secretary, as an external consultant, or as one of the new NEDs who's just come in, or one of the old NEDs who's suffering the stress of these new NEDs and the new direction, as to how you're going to influence through the senior independent director, through the company secretary, through the chairman directly, or vice chairman if there are any, is how do you collectively start to talk? And I think it takes the brave NED to say, let's work on having time together to talk as a board when we've got nobody else in the room. So it's just us. We're in a protected space. We can talk. It's not being minuted. It's not being shared. We don't have the formality of a board meeting. Now, because we're not able to be with each other in the same way we used to, this is one of the things that's probably impacting boards the most now, is they're coping, but they're not engaging fully with each other anymore. And they're not talking, so we can't pick up those nuances of when people are taking strain or when things are not in a happy place in their terms of their engagement with their board. Sometimes you can pick it up, but sometimes you can't. So I think the important part is for the chairman to allow for an informal space at the end of every board meeting, which we do a recommendation to do this as part of a board effectiveness improvement program. But you do it because effectively you're looking at culture as well. So this will work extremely well, is where you spend time as a board saying, where are we? Do we feel comfortable? Are we proud of the environment we're in? Would we go back and to our colleagues, our grandmother, whoever is the right element person to describe it, to say, is this what I am proud of? Am I achieving my outcomes in this environment successfully, or am I being silenced? And allow that board on a routine basis to have these frank conversations. The risk you have is the chairman's of the old guard and will not be as receptive to these kind of conversations, but then is to work through the influencer of a competent company secretary or competent senior independent director that is full of EQ, because that's what you need, is a lot of EQ in those two roles to support the changing culture environment that is required. So I would say it's about talking, sharing, talking, sharing, listening, and trying to get through all of that. This thing about culture, the most difficult thing we have, and what I've tried to show for you today, is there is some theory around it. There are people that, going back as far as 1995, have tried to put this into images and pictures so that you can pigeonhole it, you can box it, you can give it a name. Because the minute you can give it a name, certain characters within the board and the organization can align to the answers. Because if we talk about it in the nebulous way we do about culture, how can we talk for 3 weeks on culture and yet you still can't grab it? So the models and the theory that we've gone through today, which can be mind-numbingly boring, really is helpful for lots of people who don't think in the blue skies, open, collective thought environment, and need to be able to get them so that they can reflect, they can look at it, they can assess it, and they can objectively put it into a place. And if you do that in enough different models, which is why I gave you as many as I've come across, you will get different answers in every single one, and you won't be in the top right quadrant in every single case. And that will give you a picture as a board of some of the key elements you need to start looking at. Is what would you need to do to journey from the box you're in, the box you want to be in, without trying to box yourself too much. So it's trying to get the balance of the creativity of thought and the building of the culture experience, but sometimes using a formulaic process to get the board along that difficult journey, because it is so nebulous, is very, very helpful. So anybody who wants to go through any of those models in any more detail, absolutely give us a shout. We can have a look at it. But I didn't feel this environment death by model was going to make me the most popular person. So that is where it sees as being, I see the value in them. We've also got a comment, and very valid one, is the frameworks create a common discussion point, a baseline from which everyone in the room can be working from. Because the most difficult thing is when you're talking about ideas and concepts and behaviors and cultures, it means such a different thing to every single person, even when you're starting to look at the models. And even when you're looking at the models, you will struggle with this, where not everyone is coming from the same place. So it is definitely trying to create a common process to take people through the journey of learning, as long as it doesn't become so process driven, it becomes a process instead of becoming a reality of truly understanding and thinking, sharing and engaging in its content. There has been a request from one of the attendees to discuss this one further. So thank you very much. I'll pick that up with you. And anybody else who wants to, please, by all means, we can do a non-nugget session where we can go through each of the models. And if we have 6 or 7 people in the room and you bring with you your company, even if it's got a new name for that moment, and we can run through the exercise of plotting through the models for each of the 6 companies, which will give you the experience of your own company process, as well as looking at it at some of the other companies that are around the table. So very happy to put forward a working session of that nature. So culture is that one that even I sit back and I've taught it, and I see we did have a student or 2 of mine on the course today, on the call today, who have been through this as a whole 3-hour session. We've done it actually almost in 3 hours, actually 3 times 45 minutes, and as a single one evening session. And I've done it a couple of times, and I've done this exercise with yourselves. And I still sometimes think it's still a difficult one to grasp it, to actually get your ribs around it in a sentence. So I can understand so well why people really battle with culture. And some of the experiences that I see recently, for example, is where a board director has a pet hobby horse topic that they like to talk about, and the culture of the responsive behavior to that individual is actually got to the point that no one in the boardroom actually listens to a word that person ever says now. So the culture of ignoring one of their directors has started to build in such a degree of inefficiency and ineffectiveness for the chair to be able to effectively chair that meeting and getting people to talk in a conversation instead of one person dumping the information and everyone else rolling their eyes and a conversation doesn't build. So if you're looking at a culture of a safe place, a culture of shared contribution, that board is failing at that at the moment. So it's a really interesting dynamic for the chair to take upon themselves as to now what do you do when that has built? Many answers from the hand grenade version of it to the board development end of it. And there's a continuum of solutions that can be used to address something as complex as people's behavior within an environment. And I think the learning probably to come out of these 3 sessions is be 100% mindful of who you are, what you do, and the impact you have on others and on the collective. And if culture exercise that we've been through now, if we take that one message back with us, I think we will all support cultural development within an organization far better than we're probably doing today. No other questions have come up. I will call it a day for today. And I'd like to thank you for actually what is turning into quite an interesting bite-sized sessions, which for us is wonderful to get into some of the individual nuggets that we brush over so easily. And actually, when you talk about them, how in-depth they actually are and how much value we can get by stepping through these different pieces of content. So thanks, everyone, ladies, gentlemen, appreciate it. Thanks for the returnees and thanks to all those that are new. Looking forward to seeing you next week. Thanks. Cheers. Bye.